there. Like, I've never felt so worried or stressed about our conference.
We tried all this different wax on our skis. And,
Didn't help.
No, it just felt like I was skiing in the middle of mashed potatoes.
Yeah, I know. I don't like spring skiing.
Yeah.
I'm not a good enough skier for regular snow, let alone compromised snow.
Okay. Want to make sure that nobody is texting me about this meeting. Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the CMDA meeting for March. We're going to give folks a little bit more time to get in the room, and so we appreciate your patience. And it's great to have you all here today. So we're going to aim at about 2 minutes after 12. Galen and Travis singing, and Allison, are you able to admit people? Like, are you
Yep.
seeing? Okay, great.
Yeah.
Just making sure. Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to give folks a few more minutes, 1 or 2 more minutes to get into the room, and then we'll start our meeting. Thank you for joining us today.
I've been removing about every third person just to keep it interesting. So
I actually can't admit people.
Oh,
yeah,
no.
I
see
didn't
anybody.
make Galen a co-host. I didn't know if he was responsible enough yet.
Yeah, he can't be
Well, I'm
trusted with
still
that
not very
responsibility.
responsible, but
Oh,
We'll
it's a tough
we'll
room.
give it a shot.
you gotta let the little birdie fly at some point, Travis.
All right, there you go, Galen. I just put your wings on.
Training wings.
Good afternoon, everyone. We'll just give folks a few more minutes and then we'll get going.
Oh, you know what? I see Dr. Gom is on, which reminds me that it Survive the Sound is starting again. I'm sure he'll be participating this year. I think he does every year.
What is that?
It's like when they release the fish up in Washington and then they track them going up into the sound. My fish dies every year.
Oh,
It's a good fundraiser. Yeah, I saw you got on and I was like, oh, that reminds me. Survive the Sound is starting. Have you picked your fish?
I have not, but I've got to get on that because it's just a month away.
Yeah, you've really got me hooked, as well as my husband, because he was asking about it also.
Yeah, we've got some
our fish.
schools in the area that have their whole class engage in it, and they watch every day.
Oh
I think it's a really fun thing. I look forward to it each year.
We're going to give folks just about 1 or 2 more minutes and then we will get started. So thanks for hanging out with us, learning about fish. We're a full service meeting, of course.
Because I come up with fun names and goofy art for the fish. It's definitely worth looking at.
It's a whole lot like the fish version of the NCAA bracket. You know, you pick your fish, and it's so cool to watch them go back and forth because they have GPS tags on them, and you get to see where they get stuck and where they die and where they get out, and it's very fun.
Dr. Gom, can you send me, this is Galen, can you send me a link to how to do that?
You should drop it in the chat box, Dr. Gom.
I'll try
yeah.
to look it up right now, put it in the chat box, and I'll just send it out to everybody as you should do this for fun.
Yeah.
My kids would love it.
Your kid. How about your adult?
I know. I'm just an oversized child. I enjoy it.
Well, me too, but.
Yeah.
All right. I think we're going to, even though this is amazing.
I know. It is very helpful.
I'm going to start us off. Welcome to the April, I almost said March, April CMDA meeting. We're so glad that you joined us here today. We have a fully packed schedule for our meeting this afternoon. And I'm wondering if Joe Tansey is on. And Joe, are you here?
I am here. Good morning.
Great.
Or afternoon.
Good afternoon. The floor is yours for an update, and thank you so much for being here.
Sure. Okay. First thing I would like to, I think, update the group on is that Chad Fear has been appointed the program manager for nursing facilities. So I would like Chad to just give everybody a little bit of an update about himself, and so you all get to know him a little better. So Chad?
All right, hi, good afternoon. I told Joe I was going to tell the story about when I was stranded on a deserted island with nothing but a volleyball to keep me company, but somebody else made a movie about that. So no, just to let you know, I spent a lot of time early on with developmental disabilities, working in that field, and then I became a surveyor for developmental disabilities programs. I moved over to the health department in 2012 and had been a surveyor and a supervisor since 2015. So I've been able to spend quite a bit of time with Joe for the last 6 years and others in the office, learning the trade, learning the craft, if you will. So I'm very excited to be in Joe's position, Joe's former position. She left some pretty big shoes to fill, and I'm charged with a lot of energy, and I'm going to do everything I can to fill those shoes.
Well, welcome. So glad to have you here, and we look forward to working with you. It's a pleasure, and congratulations.
Great, thank you.
Right, and I know Chad will continue to be involved with this group and be open to questions, anything that you might have, as the same as I have been. I'll also continue to attend these meetings, as this is one of my favorite groups, and I learn so much every time. So I still plan to be around and attend as well. So I don't have a whole lot of updates for today, and I see Peter's on here to talk about vaccinations, so I'll let him do that. And but I do want to just remind everyone that visitation is so important, and not only does the health department support visitation in nursing homes, but also CMS. So please work with your homes to make sure that visitation is happening. And of course, we want it to happen in a safe manner, but please continue to work with your homes to open up for visitation, because as we're seeing, it's been really difficult on the residents not to be able to have visitation with with family and friends. So I think that's the only thing I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe. Can we ask, what have you found, the tags that you have been, that have been received by different facilities? What are the most common these days? And how are you doing with annual?
Okay, sure. So the most common tags, we're still certainly continuing to write infection control. Tag 880. We're not, for the last 3 weeks, I believe, we haven't completed any specific infection control surveys because the numbers are down so far in Colorado that none of them have flagged for CMS. But you're right, we are doing research, and I believe in March we completed 13 or 14 recertification surveys, and plan to continue doing those and hopefully increase as we go along. We are looking at doing the recertification surveys based on how long it's been since a home had their last one. And some of the homes we're looking at for almost 2 years, or at least 2 years since they've had a recertification survey. So there's a lot of catch up to do. And we are finding some significant deficiencies in some of the homes we're doing with recertification surveys. Pressure ulcers, some significant pressure ulcers where we're citing those at G or higher, scope and severity, falls not being, residents not being assessed when they're at risk for falls, and then having interventions put in place to help prevent falls. We are finding some concerns with pain management as well. So those are some of the ones that we're finding that we're citing at a higher scope and severity, as well as nutrition. And that is one area that CMS is having us focus on, is nutrition, pressure ulcers, as well as infection control, of course, always. So yeah, so I think that everybody's attention was so focused on infection control that it's hard to focus on everything. And so now we have to all turn our attention in another direction at this point.
Thank you so much, Joe. Does anybody else have any other questions? You can just unmute yourself and ask Joe. All right, thank you so much. Congratulations, Chad, and love to have you both here. So such a pleasure. So we'll move on now to Peter Myers, Residential Care Strike Team Chief. We're so glad, Peter, to have you here. If you want to unmute yourself and tell us a little bit about continuing COVID-19 vaccination in post-acute and long-term care, we're excited to have you.
Hello. Unfortunately, Peter was unable to join us. So this is Christy Schertz, one of the members of the Residential Care Strike Team that's been kind of the liaison with the vaccine team working on this continued vaccination plan. So I will try to do my best to give a little brief overview and we'll go from there. So as that pharmacy partnership for long-term care program ends with the CDC, CVS and Walgreens probably vaccinated about 920 facilities, 2,600 clinics in total. And that program is pretty much wrapped up. We can see a few changes to their Tiberius data entry system, but it doesn't look like there's any further vaccination clinics occurring. So in the light of that ending, we wanted to ensure that the facilities have access to ongoing vaccinations in the facilities. So our main focus was to work with the existing relationships that long-term care facilities have with their long-term care pharmacies and try to foster those relationships. So we're doing a lot of pairing up of facilities with a pharmacy if they do not have a long-term care pharmacy, and then certainly encouraging those relationships. It is an imperfect system, and the whole state is not covered at this time, with pharmacies for every location, but we do have local public health that is assisting and hoping to have Omnicare, one of the larger providers, join. Hopefully they're looking at April 12th or 19th is kind of what they have been saying as far as joining the federal program to get their vaccines through the federal program. So we're just doing a lot of linkage. So we have been receiving a lot of requests specifically for those second Pfizer doses. They're a little bit harder to come by. Most of the long-term care pharmacies either have Johnson & Johnson or Moderna, not typically Pfizer, but we've been quite successful with transferring doses of Pfizer vaccine, Moderna vaccine to these long-term care pharmacies so that they can assist with vaccinating those second dose people. I'm not sure if everyone's familiar, but first doses were given at some of the final clinics that CVS and Walgreens completed at facilities. So it leaves some in limbo with needing that second dose if they can't get into a Walgreens retail location for those second doses. So thankfully we've been successful with transferring those doses.
Thank you so much, Christy. I wonder, could you put if medical directors want to help their facilities or attending physicians or attending providers want to help facilities get access to continuing vaccination, could you put the website that they could go to in the chat?
Definitely, definitely. It does list that mapped list of long-term care pharmacy providers, and it does put it in a PDF form as well. And it kind of gives where that long-term care pharmacy, prefers to go to, what type of facility, how far from their facility they'll travel. And it's been very helpful with there, but I'll definitely put that into the chat.
Thank you so much for being here. We're really grateful to work with you, of course. And I think that we also just wanted to take this opportunity to have medical directors and providers to really encourage every single facility to invest in continuing COVID-19 vaccination. That some facilities may be apprehensive or they may be think that they're done. But if you're getting new admissions, then you're not done. And if you have any sort of staff turnover, which I believe that every facility probably has, then you're still not done. So, I know that Christy and Peter and the Strike Force really wants to encourage every single facility to have a plan and to have access to continuing vaccination. Christy, if they're having trouble, where should they turn if they go to the website and for some reason it's not working for them? What should they do next?
On the website, there is the Residential Care Strike Team email address, and they can certainly send an email there. It is monitored by all of us, but typically I will be the one answering those. There's also a form on the website that links people to a form if they are having trouble with those second Pfizer doses. That way they can put their information in there, and then I'll reach out to them directly to help link them up with a pharmacy that can assist them.
Thank you so much, Christy. Thanks for being here.
Sure, thank you.
Does anybody have any questions for Christy? Okay, thank you. We're going to turn now to our highlight today is no matter how popular antibiotics get, they will never go viral. And this is a presentation by our own Travis Neill. We're so happy to have him, and he has a wealth of knowledge to share with us. So Travis, it's all yours.
Thank you, Leslie. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you great.
All right, good.
We can.
So I decided we're not going to do this. We're going to jump online and check out the salmon and I'll develop a team. That looked way more interesting than antibiotic use. Now, so I've been doing antibiotic stewardship for about 3 years now in a number of nursing homes and specifically working on prescriber practices. And I started to put this together kind of based on my experience, and then noticed that there were quite a bit of recent studies and research papers that came out about antibiotic use. And so I think this is gaining some momentum and some attention because I think because of COVID, it has lost some attention. So I actually think this is pretty good timing. Feel free to ask questions as I go. You can put it in the chat feature or just unmute yourself. And with that, we'll get started. So I want to first cover a little bit of data on antibiotic prescribing during the pandemic. So one meta-analysis of several studies found that about 71% of patients hospitalized with COVID before mid-April 2020 received antibiotics, despite the fact that only 6.9% of these admissions were also associated with bacterial infections. Another study published in Clinical Infectious Diseases in August of 2020 looked at antibiotic prescribing in over 1,700 COVID-19 patients at 38 hospitals in Michigan from mid-March to mid-June 2020. And the study found that about 56% of those patients received empiric antibiotics and only 3.5% had bacterial co-infections. These numbers generally bore out in all of the studies when it came to hospitalized COVID-19 patients, in that the message was that most of the patients received antibiotics and most of them did not need it. And so percentages ranged from 50 up to 90% of COVID-19 patients receiving antibiotics, and it was consistently less than 10% that where they had any any evidence of bacterial co-infections. So data also revealed that while many of these patients initially received antibiotics, the rate used decreased significantly after 48 hours, which suggests that once the clinicians had the test results in hand and bacterial infections were ruled out, stewardship principles were put in place, and they deprescribed and de-escalated the antibiotic use. So that is good news. And this makes sense, you know, based on the pandemic and the way things rolled out, and that we did not have much testing, and certainly not rapid testing early on to be able to identify COVID-19 in many cases. But we also have, it takes typically 24 to 48 hours to get culture results back. And particularly with during the peak during hospitalizations, there was a lot of backlog, so it was taking even longer. So overall prescribing practices during the pandemic for antibiotics. So one of the benefits of socialized medicine is that they actually have good data on prescribing, and I struggled to find good data in the US on prescribing. It's kind of a moving target, but in terms of overseas, in England and Netherlands, there was some pretty good data. And so this one is the National Health Service for England published monthly data on national appointment activity in general practice. So these are just visits to primary care providers from April 1st to August 31st of 2020. Overall appointments decreased by about 20% year over year, so from 2019 to 2020, whereas during that same period, antibiotic prescribing decreased by 15.4%. So even though antibiotic prescribing has decreased overall during 2020, and we're going to talk about a number of factors that have played a role in that, you would expect that based on visitations to see doctors, that you would see a decrease, equivalent decrease in antibiotic prescribing, and it did not decrease by as much as the appointments, suggesting that there was overprescribing of antibiotics. So this is considered a net increase in antibiotic use, and there are a lot of factors associated with this. So it could reflect that there's a lot more uncertainty when you're examining patients via telemedicine. You don't have access to point of care tests like rapid strep tests and flu tests. And in general, your clinical comfort level is much lower. So it's pretty understandable that a lot of clinicians were prescribing more antibiotics during this time period. During the pandemic, more nursing home residents were prescribed antibiotics for respiratory infections year over year, including, and we'll talk about this in more detail, azithromycin up 150% year over year, ceftriaxone up 43%, and doxycycline up 28%. So azithromycin, which we will talk about more, prescribing declined after the FDA recommendations came out, essentially began to not recommend using azithromycin as another agent for COVID-19 patients. Ceftriaxone use remained elevated. And again, this suggests a general trend of over-prescribing antibiotics during 2020 and during the pandemic. So it's difficult to assess the overall changes in antibiotic prescribing during the pandemic in the US, but in general, it's been lower, including in nursing homes. What is not clear, however, is if this was associated with an increase in inappropriate use. So a net decrease in overall use in outpatient settings, a perceived increase in use relative to the number of visits and the number of exposures that patients had to doctors. And then in nursing homes, it's not clear as whether or not the antibiotic prescribing that was going on was worse, better, or about the same than it was before the pandemic. So this is just a little illustration to get an idea of the factors associated with antibiotic prescribing during 2020. So we have a reduction in elective procedures, resulting in a reduction in antibiotic use, more respiratory symptoms due to COVID, and more anxiety and need for reassurance. resulting in an increase. Then you have social distancing, hand washing, and other infection control measures, resulting in a decrease in antibiotics, decrease in visits to your PCP, a decrease in census in nursing homes, early evidence to use azithromycin for COVID-19 resulted in an increase, and this did taper down as the year went on, but it still was overprescribed relative to what it was prior to the pandemic. And then decreased resources for antibiotic stewardship. And we'll talk about more of that in a minute. So azithromycin. So prescriptions for azithromycin, as you might imagine, surged, particularly early on in the pandemic. It was up 150% in April of 2020, year over year. By August, this had reduced to 53%. In March of 2020, the recovery trial was established as a randomized clinical trial to test a range of potential treatments for COVID. The azithromycin arm of this trial was closed on November 27th of 2020 because it had met the requirements to have a good clinical trial. So analysis of this arm showed no significant difference in the primary endpoint of 28-day mortality or no evidence of beneficial effects on the risk of progression to mechanical ventilation or the length of hospital stay. So as I'm sure we are all here aware that azithromycin is no longer recommended as a treatment for anybody that has COVID-19, unless obviously there are clear signs of a bacterial infection involved. And you know, and remember too that these studies at least are focused on hospitalized patients for COVID-19. So these are the more severely ill COVID-19 patients. So we don't really have good data on azithromycin use on mild to moderate COVID disease, but presumably this bears out across the board. And you know, at least the recommendations are not to use azithromycin anymore for COVID-19. Here's just a graphic to give you a little idea of antibiotic use. About 55% of all hospital patients receive an antibiotic during their stay. About half the dollars spent on antibiotics back in 2015 were for prescriptions given in the outpatient setting. Yeah.
Oh, I think that we're still on the data azithromycin. We haven't gone to the next slide yet.
Okay. Oh yeah, I see it on there.
Ah, there you go. Thanks.
So like I said, about half of the patients that go into hospitals get prescribed antibiotics. Pretty good percentage. I think it's about 30% get prescribed more than one antibiotics. Then consistently in all the studies, and whether it's in nursing home settings or hospital settings, you find an average number of inappropriate or unnecessary antibiotic use of about 50%. So depending on the setting, it could be considered as high as 70, 80%, or as low as 20%. But on average, that's what I see over and over again, is about half of the prescriptions we estimate for antibiotics are considered inappropriate or unnecessary. And there is a big difference between inappropriate in the sense of the duration is 7 days and it should have been 5 days versus completely unnecessary. So there is some context there, but it's still a lot of room for improvement. The consequences of this. So 63% of infectious disease doctors have treated patients with infections that did not respond to any antibiotics. We're going to talk more about resistance here in a minute, but I think it's important for those of us that work in nursing homes, because I don't think we see these patients very often, if at all, where these are going to specialized hospitals or hospitals, you know, that have infectious disease teams. So we're not necessarily seeing these folks, but the numbers are definitely rising in terms of superbugs and infections of resistant organisms. About 2 million Americans acquire serious infections caused by antibiotic-resistant bacteria, and about 23,000 people die as a direct result of these infections. So then there are additional deaths as a result of the secondary effects of resistant organisms. And then on average, it's about 15,000 deaths a year from C. diff. So beginning in 2018, the Pew Charitable Trust partnered with the CDC and they wanted to evaluate antibiotic use in hospitals in order to try to set national targets to improve prescribing. And so using the national prescribing data, the experts examined antibiotic treatments for two of the most common conditions that we prescribe antibiotics. So community-acquired pneumonia and urinary tract infections. I thought it'd be interesting and to go through these very quickly because they came up with targets. And I think that targets in particular are helpful for us to focus on. And I think this translates to nursing homes pretty well. So key findings in their analysis was that about half the prescriptions examined were considered inappropriate, whether it was duration of treatment or the illnesses for which they were given. And so that 79% of all the antibiotic prescriptions for pneumonia and 77% for those for UTIs were considered inappropriate. And then about 47% of all fluoroquinolones and 27% of all VANC prescriptions were considered inappropriate. So of the 79% that were considered inappropriate for community-acquired pneumonia, about 60% of that of the inappropriate prescribing is attributed to exceeding the recommended 7 days of treatment. And then the majority of the rest is using the wrong antibiotic. The expert panel concluded that about 10% of the cases that were deemed inappropriate were, upon further analysis, that it was medically justifiable to use the antibiotic in that case. And so that gave roughly 90% of the inappropriate use as their target in terms of reduction. Similar with urinary tract infections, of the 77% that were considered inappropriate, in most instances where antibiotic use was not supported, they just lacked symptoms or microbiology tests consistent with UTIs. And then similar to the pneumonia, about 10% of these cases, they deemed appropriate use of antibiotics upon further investigation. So of course, we've got the kind of the high level criteria, but we have to individualize this care. And so, they do deep dives into this data, and same thing, about 10%, leaving again about 90% that they felt was a good target to decrease antibiotic prescribing. So of course, superbugs are the big scary thing, and I can't think of a more appropriate time to talk about superbugs than after dealing with a year of a superbug. And so, I think we've had a really vivid example of what life could be like with a highly resistant bacteria to antibiotics. And so, the superbugs are any strain of any pathogen, bacteria, viruses, and parasites that are resistant to most of the treatments that we have out there. So SARS-CoV-2 fits that category. And so we are getting a test run here of what it could be like, except it would likely be a lot worse. And of course, it depends on the infectious nature of the pathogen and all those variables. But I think this should scare us a little bit in terms of the antibiotic resistant organisms and our need to focus on better antibiotic prescribing. In 2019, the CDC updated the national estimates and found that each year about 2.8 million antibiotic resistant infections occur, resulting in deaths of about 35,000 Americans. And then countless others suffer from bouts of strep throat, urinary tract infections, and then pneumonia. And it's estimated, and of course, there's lots of factors that go into this estimate, but if current trends continue, both in terms of an increase in resistant organisms, but also in terms of the decrease in the antibiotic development pipeline. And that is really the perfect storm that I think we should be afraid of, where it's estimated that antibiotic resistant bacteria could kill an estimated 10 million people annually by the year 2050. And then of course, thousands of people contract C. diff each year, and an estimated 15,000 die as a result. So it's difficult to know the total economic impact of antibiotic resistance. But the CDC estimates that just a subset of resistant infection caused more than about 4.8 billion in medical costs in 2017. Currently, in terms of the antibiotic development pipeline, about 95% of these antibiotics are being developed by companies where it's really their only product. And this is not good for development because financially they can't afford to go all the way through the billion-dollar process that it typically takes to bring an antibiotic to market. So you really need the big pharmaceutical companies to be embracing this. But of course, antibiotics are not profitable, so they do not have an incentive to do so. So is stewardship effective? And there are a lot of studies, big and small. There's some specific to nursing home settings, and consistently it shows excellent results when stewardship programs are put in place. So here's one on 4 hospitals over a 5-year period. They saw reductions in C. diff by 86%, cost savings by about half of just on antibiotic prescriptions, and no increase in mortality rates from bacterial infections. And then there's all kinds of indirect expenses from antibiotic side effects, whether this is, if with a good stewardship program, you tend to do step down therapy earlier, you narrow your antibiotic use, you have shorter durations. All of these things translate to significant cost savings. And this would be true in nursing homes as well. So some of the key takeaways, due to the diversion of stewardship efforts during the pandemic, it has moved away from its core activities, and they moved to helping out with infection control practices and COVID-related items. So we've seen a shift in resources away from stewardship programs. And so we're still trying to analyze the effects of that. And of course, we have all this up and down effect on antibiotic prescribing. So the net effect of that is difficult to determine, but we've certainly have lots of evidence that where stewardship programs are not given attention, or they're let lag, that you see a pretty quick increase in antibiotic use, inappropriate use. So the data consistently highlights the need to have good stewardship programs in place and ensure that they remain in place. So we can't afford to have everything sidelined by another pandemic. So, the resources, particularly in nursing homes, there need to be dedicated resources to stewardship. So whether you have the infection control person, but as medical directors, we can really keep the emphasis on stewardship, regardless of what else is going on, and recognize that there is always going to be value associated with that. So some things we can do now that we're further into the pandemic and we're starting to see this renewed attention on stewardship is to reinstate stewardship efforts by using comparison data. So this is what I found to be the most effective way to communicate with providers on good practices. And this is comparing their prescribing practices to other providers, whether that's within the facility or within the local community, within nursing homes, or just nationally. And then just like the targets with the community-acquired pneumonia and UTIs, you can also translate that data into targets as well, and saying, hey, nationally we're shooting for less than 10% of inappropriate prescribing. You could say, well, for the nursing home here, we should shoot for, as a starting point, less than 30%. The only way you can do that, though, is if you're tracking this. So you have to have some tracking and then do the comparison data. And I found that to be more effective than any education that I've provided to providers, is comparing their prescribing practices to others. And that tends to change practices. An increased use of antibiotics for respiratory infections in nursing homes was likely offset by a decrease in overall infections due to a focus on infection control practices. But this illustrated how important infection control practices are. So as we have learned, and of course this is draconian now during COVID, so we obviously don't want to live in a highly quarantined environment, but it does just illustrate how important infection practices are. simply since we basically saw no flu. And so, you know, it absolutely works if we pay attention to it and we make it a priority in the nursing home. When residents are started on antibiotic therapy for a respiratory illness, timely and appropriate testing, monitoring, and follow-up is important. So antibiotic therapy can be adjusted or stopped. So just like in hospital settings where they have, you know, maybe you're waiting 48 hours or 24 hours for culture results to come back. You know, in nursing homes, the equivalent to that is antibiotic timeouts. So we can consistently implement timeouts at 24 or 48 hours where, once again, we can come together and look at the data and see if it really, if continued antibiotic use is justified. And the effects of the exposure to the antibiotic over a 5-day period versus a 2-day period, over time, that adds up to quite a bit. So it is worth it to implement practices like antibiotic timeouts. Remind providers in nursing homes about growing antibiotic resistance and the shrinking antibiotic development pipeline. I have resources that I can share with everyone on this, but I think it's important just to remind people. I think we get kind of siloed in our practice, and we focus on what's in front of us, and sometimes we forget because we don't see it. Things like growing antibiotic resistant organisms and the shrinking pipeline. So we need to remind everybody. And because all antibiotic use contributes to the emergence of resistance, antibiotics are really the only kind of medicine that I can think of where one prescriber's choice to use it can affect the ability to treat another patient. So antibiotics are truly a shared public resources, and stewardship programs are essential to managing them. So what we can control. So we can remind providers of the growing resistance and shrinking development. We can prioritize stewardship programs and infection control practices. We can't control the antibiotic use in animals. It's a big problem. It should be part of any good discussion about antibiotic resistance, but that's not in our wheelhouse. So all bacteria evolve and adapt. That's just the way it is. We can't control it, and antibiotics are not profitable. We can't control that either by the nature of how they're prescribed. So the emphasis needs to be, and it is starting to change, but it needs to be on this is a public health issue that we need to figure out ways to either incentivize companies to spend the money, or we just decide as a community, as a healthcare community, as a society, really to spend the money on developing these drugs in order to protect us from these future superbugs. The message: grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I am reminded of that all the time over the last year, probably more than I ever have before, but I think antibiotics are definitely in that category. Questions, and if we have time, let's see. Do we have a couple minutes, Leslie?
Sure, of course.
So let's see if I can get this to work. I think it is meaningful to hear stories about antibiotic resistant organisms, because again, I don't know that we all see this. So if I can get this to play.
And I went up into the elevator. Let's call it the 27 seconds of hell. Chris met me at the elevator. I knew what I had to tell Joyce. I remember his words. He said, I found him. And I hit the floor. I said, I just couldn't believe it. You're bred up to believe that you get sick, there's an antibiotic for you, and they give it to you and you get better. But since then, we've learned that too much is not a good thing. August 22nd, 2007. Mom and Dad, I hope everything is going as well as can be expected. I was removed from my squad leader position to fill the assistant platoon guide position.
Yeah, that's great, but holy crap. Something about 9/11 was a big deal to him, and he put it upon himself to join the army. He knew that it was the right challenge at the right time. He was so special. He could do anything he set his mind to do. He was exceptionally proud, Carl. He was the apple of my eye. I expect to see great things come out of this, and I know that I'll thrive in the Army. Love always, Carl. Wow. He was never healthy when he got home. He had chronic coughs and stuff like that. We always just assumed it was bronchitis. And then as time went on, he became progressively more ill until July 2nd, 2010. And that's when everything really started to spiral downward. It was a day of our anniversary. Doctor called he was really shaky. He was in the hospital. Cold, and he didn't feel good. He was pretty sick. I thought he'd get better. Much sicker than any of us realized. They got him on a course of antibiotics. They sent him home. Joyce got up to check on him. And within 48 hours, he was back in the hospital again. Uncontrollable. He got sicker, and he got more infections going. Embolism, spots in his legs, bacterial endocarditis. 7 antibiotics. He was highly resistant to a number of antibiotics. They gave Carl every antibiotic. There was nothing left on the shelf by the time they were done. Went into his hospital room, and he wasn't in the bed. And I heard water running in the bathroom. I figured he was taking a shower, getting ready. Finally, I knocked on the door, wanted to know if he was okay, and I didn't get any answer. And so I opened the door, and he had slumped down on the floor. And my heart knew that he was gone the second that I looked at him. There are no words. There simply are no words. Hello, baby boy. Hi, Bubba. The person you would have become. God, we miss you. The official cause of death was cardiac arrest. That was the simple answer. His tricuspid valve in his heart was devastated by the bacteria that invaded his body, some of them unknown. I was not aware of the antibiotic issue prior to Carl getting sick. We had no idea the seriousness of it or how many people were being infected by it. When we visited senators, I wanted them to make sure that they knew that this is a huge issue. We asked them to please focus on ensuring that there's enough funding for research and development. Remembering my son doesn't bring him back, but it may help save your son. If we don't do this now, it's going to be too late.
Okay. So I don't know if the sound was very good on that. It was hard for me to get the two to coordinate, but I actually think that stories are very helpful when we are trying to implement changes that on a small level we simply can't see. We can't tell. We see the benefits of antibiotic all the time, but I don't know that we really see the downside of it. So I think it's important to remind ourselves of stories like this. So any questions?
Hey, Travis, this is Christine LaRocca, and what a great presentation. And I'm almost glad some of that video was cutting out because it was almost too much to hear. I did want to ask you of the antibiotics that you had shown, increased by 100% or 50%. Being the eternal optimist, I noticed that you didn't mention the fluoxetines or levofloxacin. Does that imply that we've done a better job with that class of drugs? I'm just wondering if you have anything to share about that, and it helps Telligent to know where to target our QI assistance. And since you like stories, in 1997, my 10-month-old woke up and was, when they say a baby is lethargic, I mean just a limp noodle, burning up, and he had pneumonia. And 50 years ago, from 1997, he would have been dead. And I remember that after just one dose of antibiotics, he got an IM, what a difference it made. So to think that those common infections might not be treated anymore, treatable anymore is pretty sobering.
Yeah, definitely. And, and our role in this is, relatively small, certainly at an individual level. But it's the net effects of everybody's attention to it, not just in our own prescribing practices, but in, talking about it and communicating to legislators and focusing on the antibiotic pipeline. So the fluoroquinolone question, I don't know the answer. All I know is that it didn't come up as one of the top antibiotics that we'd seen a spike in nursing homes. So that's kind of where I had focused my efforts. And, we saw a general increase in a number of antibiotics. But again, that kind of tapered down over time, azithromycin being the biggest example of that reduction. And then as stewardship programs have kind of come back online, the data looks pretty good for seeing further decreases. But the data it's still new. It's still, hard to get a lot of data on this, particularly in nursing homes. So I don't know about fluoroquinolones.
Well, thank you so much, Travis. That was a really amazing presentation. I can't thank you enough for sharing that in the video, which was a game changer. So thank you. It's hard to move on from that video. We are just going to also update you. It's hard to switch gears, at least it's hard for me, to our conference that's in just 2.5, 3 weeks, which we hope that you'll come and join us. So I am going to ask Allison Villegas to come to talk to us about our CMDA conference on April 23rd. And Allison, do you want to share your screen or do you want me to share?
Oh, yeah, if you can share it.
Sure,
you have yours all pulled up.
And you can start chatting.
Yeah, so we just wanted to remind everybody that registration is still open, and we encourage everyone to register. You can even register up to the night before the conference. We're doing things a little bit different this year. We do have an event the Thursday before, just to kind of show everybody how to work the technology so people can get used to logging in. But most importantly, we'll be doing a tribute for Dr. Robbins. And we'll be sending the link out. I know there's been a lot of questions from folks about, when will we get the information? How do we get the links? All of the links will be sent out to the registered folks prior to the event. So Thursday we'll get that link sent out for that so that you guys can attend to help us celebrate Dr. Robbins. And then Friday we'll send out a separate link. And of course you can register at our website, cmda.us. And look at that great agenda. So many fun speakers, a lot of national speakers. It's going to be an excellent day. So please make sure you register if you haven't had the chance to yet.
Thank you so much, Allison. We just want to remind people that you can get CME credit. So it's the cheapest CME credit probably you can find in the nation. You also get to come together as a community with all of us in Colorado as a post-acute long-term care community. We haven't joined with each other in 2 years. So it's a nice opportunity. It's also nice to know the standard of care. What is the standard of care at the end of the COVID-19 pandemic in post-acute and long-term care medicine? We are so lucky in Colorado also to partner with CDPHE, with Telegen. We have a lot of collaborative speakers. So we're all learning the same things on these days. So we have Telegen there, we have the surveyors there. And so it's really an opportunity for us to all to work together towards a common goal of providing the highest standard of care in our space. So it's 1 day a year, and you can also get some prizes, and you can still get a tote bag. Even if you register today or tomorrow, you will be able to get a tote bag. We are making the tote bag, so I know there's cool stuff in there. So please think about registering 1 day, Friday, April 23rd, and please join us on Thursday. I met Larry Robbins. He presented here at CMDA. He was remarkable, and it's our chance to say thank you. So does anybody have any questions about the first ever CMDA virtual conference? Okay. All right. So we're going to move along. And Singh and I are going to move lightning fast, and we're going to share with you top 10 pearls from the AMDA 2021 conference. So hold on, I'm going to share my screen. I'm getting so much better at this, I just have to say. I'll probably jinx myself. Hold on a sec. Okay. Okay. All right. These are Dr. Palat and I are our top 10 pearls from the conference, and we're going to start with Singh. Are you ready?
Sure.
All right.
Yeah, sure. Well, the first one came from one of the presentations about leadership, and it talked about how innovations are a big part of helping us move to the future in our nursing facilities, and specifically process-based innovations will make a bigger impact than content-based. For an example, rather than teaching our staff how to communicate on advanced care planning or teaching them how important it is, we should provide a structured tool to help the staff do it, and that'll be more effective. Next slide. There was a review of different articles that have been published in the past year, and this one stood out to me, that deprescribing anticholinesterase inhibitors was not associated with a significant increase in the all-cause negative events, but it was associated with reduced falls and fractures in older nursing home residents with dementia, specifically people with severe dementia and age over 65. So if you want to help to reduce falls and fractures, one thing we can do is assure our patients and their families and staff members that the donepezil or Aricept may not be necessary. Next slide. We both attended this really great workshop on communication skills. And on this slide, you can see a list of some of the tips on effective listening skills. It was really remarkable. The two that really stood out to me were the ones in the middle. Rephrase what they are saying, and do not think about what to say next. That means when I'm being a good listener with someone else, I'm taking that time to be silent and to be present. And I'm not just using that time for listening to plan what I'm going to say next. I'm actually truly listening. Next slide. There was a great session about the updates on what to do with people after hip fractures who are rehabilitating in skilled nursing facilities. And a big part of it is the pain control. Pharmacological approaches to pain control should include scheduled non-opiate medications, such as topical creams, patches, and scheduled acetaminophen, in addition to as-needed opioids, if not contraindicated, and used for a set amount of time. Next slide. And AMDA also had a series of pre-recorded sessions on demand. And this one was about anticoagulation and falls in older adults. They pointed out the average risk of stroke per year in older adults with AFib ranges from 5 to 24%, increasing with age, but only 56% of patients older than 65 with AFib receive anticoagulation. And the number one cited reason for that is the fear of falls. Well, they cited this article that was just published last December. A given patient would have to fall approximately 295 times for anticoagulation risks to outweigh the benefits of stroke prevention. And this is actually per year. Thanks, Leslie. Your turn.
Thank you so much. So this is something that Genesis used during the pandemic to try to alleviate pandemic fatigue for washing our hands and wearing our masks. It's also exhausting. And they called it behavioral drift. They partnered with the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania and Val Health to address behavioral drift. And they did this by reframing. Instead of washing your hands, that you have to wash your hands and we have to do it all the time, take it as a break. Take a deep breath, think of something lovely, and use a positive reinforcement instead of punishments. Hold on a second here. Okay. Next is talking about delirium in SNFs. 25% of delirium happens in our SNF patients, in patients who are status post hip fractures. It's a pretty big percentage. Common components of successful delirium prevention program is pain control, working on bladder and bowel assessments, early mobilization, reorientation. This is something easy that anybody can do, can walk in and say, hey, Mrs. Jones, it's April 6th. And did you know that the CMDA conference is coming up on April 23rd to reorient them? Medication review, of course, addressing malnutrition, avoiding dehydration, managing sleep disorders, talking about good sleep hygiene, addressing hearing and vision issues, which are so often overlooked, and other geriatric syndromes, and training the staff to help with all the above. How to deal with a difficult or angry person. This was also part of our communications workshop, which I found really useful. Number one, what does not work? Getting angry yourself, confronting them at a time when they are in full outburst mode, telling someone to calm down, showing pity, or giving in. What does work is standing your ground, preparing an exam in advance, your emotional armor, listening, empathizing, validating, and finding out what the real issue is. Usually anger is the second issue, and it's usually in reaction to the first emotion. And finding out what that is can be obviously very helpful. And setting boundaries, yet being kind. Dr. Palat and I also attended this workshop where they reminded us that the word responsibility is responsibility, the ability to choose your response. Highly proactive people recognize that ability. They don't blame circumstances or conditions for their behavior, but they choose their response. And finally, just one last pearl, instead of talking about the new normal as we feel like maybe we talk about daily with COVID-19, talk about the now normal, because things will continue to change and modify, and we will continue to adjust. So those are some pearls for from the AMDA 2021 conference. We hope that you'll join us at AMDA in 2022, I believe in person in Baltimore. So that will be fun. I know we're just out of time, and we really thank you for spending 2 extra minutes with us. And if you have any questions or concerns, please, the floor is open. Does anybody have anything to add for this meeting? Okay, I want to thank Travis so much for the incredible presentation. We look forward to seeing you at the CMDA conference, April 23rd. You can register at cmda.us. And thank you for joining us today. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, Leslie.
My pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Travis, great job. Really, really good. Thank you.
I just wanted to get on and say, I'm not crying, you're crying.
Yeah, I like.
And then you're like, oh, it's hard to
comment.
transition. Hey, Allison. I'm like, what? I forgot all the things I was going to talk about. Thanks, Leslie, for
I was, Travis did such a great job. I think it's so important what he did, and I can't thank him enough. It was really hits home when you think about, the humans that you affect.
Yeah, the video did me in. That's where I was like, wait, my turn? So thanks for stepping in.
Yeah. Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I went over 2 minutes. Do you think anybody minded?
We have some extra people still on.
Yeah, nobody minded, no.
Oh, that's good.
Good.
Well, thanks, you guys.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.